Hey guys, we're gonna keep going with fraction comparisons. Last week we went over the different ways to compare fractions, right? So we have our fractions, we could do it tape diagram, we can use number lines, we can find common multiples, or we went over our cross multiplication, or what we call butterfly method, to simplify it. So today we're gonna go over a couple problems doing the multiple ways. I'm mostly going to stick to tape diagram. There's not any difference between tape diagram and number line, so I'll probably stick with tape diagram. When I first do it, we'll do common multiples, and then we'll look at the butterfly. Remember, the most important thing to do when you are doing a tape diagram is both tape diagrams must be equal length. Why is that important? Because if you think about the tape diagram, and when we're putting it into a fraction, each tape diagram equals the same amount. It doesn't matter if my fractions are in fourths or I'm putting it in 8 pieces. The end amount is, if I have 4 total out of 4, it is equal to 1 whole, right? Same thing here. It's in 8 pieces, but if I color in all 8 pieces, it is still equal to 1 whole. So all tape diagrams, when we're talking about fractions, equal 1 whole at the end. So that is why they need to be equal in size. So if I look at my first problem, it's 3/7 and 6/14. I already went ahead and drew it. When you're drawing out your tape diagrams, it's always important to note where your halfway point is. So this would be my halfway point. And it's a little harder to do when you have an odd number as your denominator with your fraction. Why? Because you can't really divide 7 in half, right? If you did divide it in half, 7 divided by 2 is 3.5. So my halfway point would be 1, 2, 3, and a half of 1. There's a continuation of 4, and then you have the other 3. So if we color these in, I have 1, 2, 3, there's 3/7, coloring in 6/14, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, the problem with tape diagrams is if you have something like this, we're not always certain that the way we're drawing it is the exact, I can't be certain that this is exactly in 14 equal pieces. Same here, I can't be certain this is exactly in 7 equal pieces. So when we have something like this where it looks this close, that's why we go ahead and we can put that we use common multiples to make our fractions similar on the bottom. So in this case, I find the multiples of 7. They're 7, 14, 21. Look at the multiples for 14. They are 14, 28. I can keep going, but I already see 2 in common. They share 14 in common. I'm going to leave it at 14. Why? Because this is already in 14. So that means I only have to change one of my fractions. So if I'm going to change 3/7 and turn it into 14ths, I need to figure out how to get there. So start with your bottom number. In order to get from 7 to 14, I realize I multiplied it by 2. So if you do it to the bottom, you do the same to the top. 3 times 2 is 6. So what this kind of showed me, but I wasn't certain about, was that they are in fact equal. 6/14 is equal to 6/14. All right, if we look at number 3, we're comparing 3/7 and 6/14, or 5/7 and 1/2. There we go. So I already have it drawn out. Same thing here. This is my halfway mark. Now the good thing about the halfway mark for my bottom fraction, 1/2, is 1/2 is 1/2. So there's that fraction, 5/7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now with this one right here, I don't think that I would have to go ahead and do common multiples because it's pretty obvious, but for the sake of practice, we can go ahead and do that. So I have 5/7 and I have 1/2. Finding the common multiples. Multiples of 7 are 7, 14, 21. Common multiples for 2, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. I'm going to stop there because I found what they have in common. They have 14 in common. So that means I'm changing both of these. So if we're changing 7ths into 14ths, we figure out how did we get from 7 to 14. We multiplied by 2. If we do it to the bottom, we have to do it to the top. 5 times 2 is 10. If we look at 2, we're changing it to 14ths as well. How did I get from 2 to 14? I multiplied by 7. So if I do it to the bottom, I need to multiply the top by 7, and I get 7/14. So here are my new fractions. They both have the same denominator, which makes life easier. 10 is bigger than 7, so I can easily see that 5/7 is greater than 1/2. Now, our third fraction that we have here, there's 3 fractions. So I have 1/6, 1/11, 1/16. So I have my 6 done, I need 11ths. Now remember, because this is an odd number, it's a little harder. So if we look at the halfway point, half of 11 would be 5.5. So I would do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10. Now it's in 11ths. 16s are easier. There has to be 8 on each side. All right, so we have 16. So 1/6, 1/11, 1/16. So we can see here, if we're looking the greatest, 1/6 is the biggest, 1/11, and then 1/16 would be the smallest. Now the easy way to look at this is also to remind ourselves, if we start in a whole, if I'm putting it in only 6 pieces, the pieces get to be a little bigger. If I'm putting it in 11 pieces, that whole is the same size. I'm having to make the pieces smaller. And finally with 16ths, it's going to be the smallest, because remember, we're always starting with the same size. We're just having to, the more pieces we need, the smaller the pieces need to be. It'd be the same as if we had a pizza, right? If you're sharing it with only 6 people, people are going to get bigger slices. If you have to share it with 11 people, it's the same pizza, but each person's getting a smaller size. So keep that in mind when you're doing that. And then finally, the cross multiplying, we can look at that real quick. Okay, so when we cross multiply, we're taking the bottom number and we're multiplying it by the top number. We do 14 times 3, 2, 3, 42. Take the bottom number, multiply it by the top. 7 times 6 is 42. So here we can see that they are even. Same thing with this one, 5/7, 1/2. Take the bottom number, we multiply it across times the top, 10. Same thing here, 7 times 1, 7. 10 is greater than 7, so 5/7 is greater than 1/2. Now it's harder when you have 3 like this, which is why if you have 3 that you're comparing, it might be easier to draw it out.